The Soviets once created a real-life Mad Max, a Nazi officer who risked his life to save thousands of Chinese civilians, an engineer who solved a life-threatening crisis on Apollo 13 while giving birth, a US president who almost received 50 elephants. History is full of stories stranger than fiction, and by the end of this video you'll have heard some of the most unbelievable ones. September 12, 1942. The Atlantic Ocean, the German U-boat, U-156 spots debris and bodies floating in the water. Moments earlier the submarine had torpedoed the RMS Laconia, a British ocean liner carrying over 2,700 people, civilians, soldiers, and Italian prisoners of war. But something unexpected happens. Instead of leaving the survivors to their fate, Captain Werner Hartenstein orders a rescue. The Germans pulled dozens of people aboard, rigging a makeshift Red Cross flag to signal their peaceful intentions. A message is even sent to Allied forces requesting assistance. For hours the submarine moves slowly across the waves, gathering survivors. The operation grows with 2 more U-boats and even a Vichy French warship joining in. Then on September 16th, a B-24 Liberator bomber appears on the horizon. It sees the submarine, sees the survivors, but instead of helping, it attacks. Bombs drop, hitting people in the water. The U-156 barely escapes, forced to abandon the rescue mission and leave hundreds behind. In response, the German High Command issues Triton Null, forbidding U-boats from rescuing survivors ever again. The rules of war had just changed forever. Years later, the Laconia incident would be discussed at the Nuremberg trials as an example of how the chaos of war blurred the lines between morality and military necessity. September 2001, Washington, D.C. Ben Sliney woke up early that morning. It was his first day as the National Operations Manager of the FAA, a prestigious role. Years of experience had led him here. He expected to spend the day learning the ropes, meeting staff, settling in. Instead, minutes into his shift, a phone call changed everything. The towers have been hit. Then another. Confusion turned to chaos. Senior officials looked at Sliney, waiting for instructions. But there was no protocol for this. Then came the Pentagon. The entire country was under siege, and Sliney was in charge of the most complex airspace on Earth, on day 1. Every minute new reports flooded in, rumors of more hijackings, planes going silent. It wasn't just about reacting, it was about making decisions with no precedent. Before noon, Ben Sliney had grounded every single plane in the US, shutting down 4,000 flights in record time. He had walked in expecting his first day to be quiet. It turned out to be the most intense first day in modern history. Speak of that day, as the dust settled over Ground Zero, an army of search and rescue dogs combed through the wreckage. Day after day they climbed over steel beams, sniffed through rubble, searching for survivors, but they found nothing. These dogs, trained to locate the living, had spent their entire careers being rewarded for success. Finding someone meant celebration, treats, and praise. But here, in the ruins of the Twin Towers, there were no survivors to find. Handlers began to notice something unusual. The dogs became despondent, restless, even anxious. They were failing their mission, or at least, that's what they believed. And so, to lift their spirits, their handlers started staging fake rescues. They would have volunteers hide under the debris, allowing the dogs to find them. The moment of discovery brought wagging tails, renewed energy, and a brief sense of purpose. But their role went beyond search and rescue. They became symbols of hope. Their presence alone comforted firefighters, police officers, and grieving families. In a place filled with death, these dogs brought a moment of light. One of them was Britannia, a golden retriever deployed from Texas with her handler Denise Corliss. Britannia spent days navigating the ruins, tirelessly searching, but just as importantly, she became a therapy dog for the rescuers themselves, offering quiet companionship to those who had seen too much. Britannia lived a long life, continuing to serve on disaster relief missions before retiring. In 2016 she was given a hero's farewell. Draped in an American flag as firefighters lined up to salute her one last time, she was the last surviving 9/11 rescue dog. Today, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum honors these four-legged heroes in its Canine Courage exhibit, ensuring their sacrifices, both physical and emotional, are never forgotten. Even in a place marked by tragedy, they proved that courage comes in many forms, sometimes on 4 legs. During World War II, the streets of Denmark were crawling with danger. The country had been occupied by Nazi forces since 1940, and the Danish resistance was on high alert. They needed a way to identify enemy infiltrators, a foolproof test that no foreign agent could fake. Their solution? A dessert. Rodgrod med flode. To a Dane it was just a simple dish, red berry pudding with cream. But to a foreigner it was a linguistic nightmare. The Danish language has sounds that are nearly impossible for outsiders to pronounce correctly, and this particular phrase was notorious. Resistance fighters would casually ask suspicious individuals to say the words. If they stumbled, hesitated, or pronounced it wrong, they were exposed. This wasn't the first time language had been used as a wartime weapon. Throughout history, similar tests, known as shibboleths, had been used to separate friend from foe. But few were as uniquely Danish as this one. In the fight against Nazi infiltration, a simple bowl of pudding became an unexpected tool of war. Zhang Zongchang, a notorious warlord of post-imperial China, ruled the Shandong province with an iron fist. He was feared for his brutality, eccentricity, and unpredictability, earning him nicknames like the dog-eating general, after a popular card game he enjoyed. Among his many bizarre habits, Zhang was known for his massive harem, allegedly numbering between 30 to 50 concubines from different nationalities. Unable to remember their names or communicate with them, he simply assigned them numbers instead. One of his strangest moments came during a severe drought. Frustrated with the lack of rain, Zhang struck the statue of the rain god and ordered his artillery to fire shells into the sky. The next day, rain poured down. Whether it was coincidence or divine intervention, it only strengthened the myth of his unorthodox leadership. Born into a dynasty of conquerors, Kutulun, granddaughter of Genghis Khan and daughter of Kaidu Khan, was unlike any other Mongol princess. Raised among 14 warrior brothers, she became a legendary figure on the battlefield, often outperforming male warriors. But it was her unique approach to marriage that set her apart. Kutulun refused to marry unless a man could defeat her in wrestling. Any suitor who tried had to wager 100 horses, but if he lost, she kept the animals. And she never lost. By the time she reached adulthood, her personal herd had grown to 10,000 horses. Even Marco Polo wrote about her, amazed by her strength and independence. Kutulun remained undefeated her entire life, proving that in the Mongol world, power was not just reserved for men. We are in 1861. Across the Pacific Ocean, a letter arrives at the White House with an unusual offer. King Mongkut of Siam had been closely following the progress of the United States. He admired its technological advancements, but he saw one major flaw: America had no elephants. In a formal letter to President Abraham Lincoln, the king proposed a grand gift: a shipment of 50 elephants to be released into the American wilderness. His vision? That these elephants would breed, multiply, and become the foundation of a strong labor force, assisting with construction, transport, and agriculture in the growing nation. Mongkut's offer was well-intentioned, but there was just one problem. The United States was not Southeast Asia. The vast forests and plains of America were nothing like the tropical jungles where elephants thrived. More importantly, Lincoln had far bigger concerns. The Civil War had just begun. In a polite but firm response, Lincoln declined the offer. The U.S. government saw no need for elephants when it had horses, railroads, and industrial machinery. Mongkut's proposal became a fascinating historical footnote, a reminder of how different leaders envisioned progress in the 19th century. Had Lincoln accepted, perhaps today herds of elephants would be roaming the forests of America. The last king of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, Charles II, was a man shaped by centuries of inbreeding, literally. Born in 1661, he was the product of generations of royal marriages between close relatives. His family tree looked less like a web, and more like a straight line. Charles had so many overlapping ancestors that geneticists today estimate his inbreeding coefficient at 25%, which means he was more inbred than if his parents had been siblings. The consequences were devastating. He suffered from physical deformities, weak health, and severe mental disabilities. His jaw was so misshapen that he could barely chew his food, and he reportedly didn't learn to speak until age 4. But the worst part? He was the king of one of the most powerful empires in the world. Spain, once a dominant force in Europe, was ruled by a monarch who couldn't produce an heir, and was barely capable of governing. His reign was marked by decline, political instability, and foreign influence. When Charles II died in 1700 without children, the Spanish throne passed to the Bourbon dynasty, marking the end of Habsburg rule in Spain. His tragic life remains one of the most extreme examples of how royal inbreeding can destroy a dynasty. Had his ancestors married outside their family, Spain's history might have taken a very different turn. August 28, 1969. A hospital room in California. Judith Love Cohen, a brilliant aerospace engineer, was in labor. But she wasn't just waiting for contractions. She was working on an urgent problem for NASA. Cohen was part of the team that designed the Abort Guidance System, or AGS, for the Apollo missions, a crucial backup navigation system in case of an emergency. As she waited to give birth, she sat with her notes, going through calculations and troubleshooting an issue. She finished the problem, called her boss, submitted the solution, then gave birth. The baby she delivered that day? Jack Black, the future actor and musician. A year later, in April 1970, that very system played a key role in saving Apollo 13. When an oxygen tank exploded in space, crippling the main navigation system, the AGS Cohen helped develop became essential in guiding the astronauts back to Earth. Without it, they may never have survived. Judith Love Cohen didn't just help bring one life into the world that day, she helped save 3 more lives in space. John O'Neill had spent years sounding the alarm. As one of the FBI's top experts, he had been tracking different organizations long before most people had even heard of. He investigated the 1993 World Trade Center, the 1998 U.S. Embassy, and the USS Cole in 2000. With each attack, he saw the pattern. The organizations were getting bolder, and America was vulnerable. But the higher-ups didn't listen. O'Neill was vocal, aggressive, and refused to stay silent. His warnings about a major hit on U.S. soil were dismissed. He clashed with bureaucrats, and in August 2001, frustrated and sidelined, he quit the FBI. His new job? Head of security at the Twin Towers. On 2001, John O'Neill was inside the towers when the planes hit. The man who had spent his career warning about outside threats died in the very place he had tried to prevent. His story is one of tragic irony, a man who saw what was coming but was ignored until it was too late. December 1937, Nanking, China. The city was in flames. The Japanese Imperial Army had invaded, and what followed was one of the darkest chapters of World War II. Thousands lost their lives, and the civilian population had nowhere to hide. But in the midst of the chaos, one man stood up to protect them. John Rabe. A German businessman and a member of the Nazi Party, Rabe was an unlikely hero. But when he saw the atrocities happening around him, he refused to turn a blind eye. Using his status and diplomatic connections, he helped establish the Nanking Safety Zone, a demilitarized area meant to shelter civilians. Rabe and his colleagues took in over 250,000 Chinese civilians, shielding them from the violence outside. He even used his Nazi armband as protection, convincing Japanese officers to respect the zone and leave the refugees unharmed. But he didn't just save lives, he documented everything. His detailed diaries would later become critical evidence of what happened in Nanking, earning him the title of the Schindler of China. When the war ended, Rabe returned to Germany, expecting recognition for his bravery. Instead, he was interrogated for his Nazi affiliation and spent his final years in poverty. His story was nearly forgotten, until his diaries were rediscovered, proving that sometimes heroes come from the most unexpected places. It was supposed to be a game-changer. The polygraph machine, better known as the lie detector, promised to revolutionize law enforcement. By measuring heart rate, breathing, and sweat levels, it could supposedly tell if someone was lying. But from the very start, something went wrong. During one of its first-ever tests, the machine completely failed. Not because the suspect was lying, but because he was too nervous. His heart was racing, his palms were sweaty, not from guilt, but from the sheer stress of being tested. The polygraph labeled him a liar, even though he was telling the truth. It was a disastrous first impression, and it raised a troubling question: how reliable is a test that confuses anxiety with deception? Over the years, polygraphs have been used in countless police investigations, government screenings, and even high-profile criminal cases. But critics argue that it doesn't actually detect lies, it only measures stress. Someone calm and trained can beat the test, while an innocent but nervous person might fail. Despite its scientific flaws, the polygraph is still widely used today. But that first failure proved a crucial lesson. Sometimes the fear of being caught can be just as powerful as guilt itself. Aga Muhammad Khan, the ruthless founder of the Qajar dynasty in the late 1700s, ruled with an iron fist. His cruelty was infamous, his punishment swift. Those who crossed him rarely lived to tell the tale. One day 2 of his servants were condemned to death for a serious offense. The execution was scheduled, but there was a problem. It was a religious holiday, a time of solemn observance. Despite his merciless reputation, Aga Muhammad Khan decided to delay the execution out of respect for the occasion. That night, the 2 prisoners, knowing their fate was merely postponed, decided to take their chance. While the palace slept, they broke into their ruler's quarters and assassinated him in his own bed. The man who had terrorized Persia met his end not on the battlefield, not at the hands of a rival king, but because of a single act of mercy. June 22, 1941, Moscow, Soviet Union. At 4:31 a.m., a telephone rang inside the Kremlin. The message was brief, but catastrophic. Germany has invaded the Soviet Union. For years, Stalin had ignored warnings that Hitler was planning to betray their non-aggression pact. Soviet spies, defectors, even Churchill himself had tried to warn him. Stalin dismissed them all. He was convinced that Hitler wouldn't dare attack. But now, the truth was undeniable. At that moment, a Soviet photographer captured a rare image. Stalin, visibly shaken, processing the betrayal. His face was unlike anything ever seen in propaganda posters. Not defiant, not resolute, but tense, uncertain, even fearful. This photo was never meant to be seen by the public. It contradicted everything Stalin wanted people to believe about him. The Soviet leadership immediately classified it, and for decades it remained hidden. But it wasn't lost. The image eventually surfaced, a stark contrast to the carefully curated photos of Stalin as an all-powerful, unshakable leader. It showed that even the most feared man in the USSR could be caught off guard, staring into the abyss of what would become the largest war in human history. World War II separated many lovers, but for Gordon Bocher and Gilbert Bradley, their love was more than just distant. It was forbidden. They were 2 British soldiers, deeply in love at a time when being gay was illegal. They couldn't hold hands in public, they couldn't be seen together, but they could write. For years they exchanged letters, pouring their hearts onto paper, knowing that if anyone discovered them, it could destroy their lives. One letter from Gordon read, "Can you imagine? If only our letters could be published in a book, perhaps people would finally understand." Decades later, that wish came true. Their letters were discovered, preserved, and published for the world to see. What was once a secret, hidden for survival, is now a powerful testament to a love that defied war, society, and time itself. Even in the darkest moments of history, love found a way. Manchester, England, 2003. It sounded like something out of a twisted thriller, an orchestrated attack carefully staged by himself. John, a 14-year-old suffering from severe depression, believed he had no reason to live, but instead of taking his own life, he devised a disturbing plan. He manipulated his best friend Mark into assaulting him. John created an elaborate online persona, convincing Mark that he was speaking to intelligence agents and secret operatives. Over months, he fabricated an entire web of deception, telling Mark that he had been chosen for a top-secret mission to eliminate a dangerous person. That target? John himself. On a quiet night, Mark lured John into an alley and stabbed him multiple times. He believed he was following orders, but John survived. When police uncovered the truth, they were stunned. This was the first known case of someone being charged for inciting their own attack. The trial left the court grappling with an impossible question: who was truly responsible? The attacker, who was brainwashed into committing the crime, or the victim, who orchestrated his own attack? A case like this had never happened before, leaving the legal system struggling to define who was guilty, and who was the real victim. Late 1970s United States. Imagine this. You're a politician, and a wealthy foreign investor offers you a briefcase full of cash in exchange for political favors. What would you do? For 7 U.S. congressmen, the answer was simple. They took the money. This was Operation Abscom, a secret FBI sting designed to expose corruption at the highest levels of government. Posing as Arab businessmen, undercover agents offered bribes of up to $50,000 to members of Congress in exchange for political favors. The results were shocking. 25% of those approached accepted. Hidden cameras caught it all. Senators and representatives casually stuffing wads of cash into their pockets, some even joking about the bribes. When the operation was revealed in 1980, the scandal rocked Washington. It led to multiple convictions, ruined careers, and proved just how easily power can be bought. Abscam remains one of the most famous political scandals in American history. When money is involved, some politicians will always take the bait. We're in the 1950s. It's late at night and a police officer on patrol needs a break. Where can he go? Back then, options were limited. Most restaurants closed early, and there were few places open past midnight, except for one: donut shops. Bakeries making fresh donuts for the morning rush were often the only 24-hour businesses around. Cops stopping in for coffee and a quick bite became a common sight, and soon, it turned into a routine. Over time, the image of a police officer with a donut became a cultural stereotype, often played for laughs in movies and TV. But in reality, it wasn't about the donuts. It was about convenience, routine, and a safe place to take a break. Today, the stereotype remains, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a badge of honor. But now you know, it all started with nothing more than late-night patrols and a lack of options. September 1st, 1859. British astronomer Richard Carrington was observing the sun when he saw something shocking: a massive solar eruption, unlike anything recorded before. Less than 18 hours later, the Earth was hit. A wave of charged particles slammed into our planet's magnetic field, triggering the most powerful geomagnetic storm in history. The night sky lit up with auroras, not just in the Arctic but as far south as the Caribbean. But the real chaos? It happened on the ground. Telegraph systems across the world failed. Operators received electric shocks, machines sparked into flames, and wires worked even after being unplugged. Some thought the world was ending. If an event like this happened today, the results would be catastrophic. Satellites, power grids, GPS systems, and the internet could all collapse. Scientists warn that we're overdue for another storm. The only question is, will we be ready this time? May 1933, Soviet Union. In the middle of Siberia, 6,700 prisoners were packed onto a remote island in the Ob River. Their crime? Nothing at all. Stalin's regime had rounded up undesirables, peasants, beggars, petty criminals, and sent them into exile. Their destination? Nazino Island. There were no farms, no supplies, no shelter. Within weeks, starvation took hold. And when there's no food, people start eating each other. Survivors recalled groups hunting the weakest, carving flesh from the dead, even eating people alive. In just 13 weeks, over 4,000 people lost their lives. The truth about Nazino was covered up for decades. Even today, few know the full horror of what happened. But if you want to hear the full story, we could do an entire video on it. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. At 7:09 a.m., a lone B-29 superfortress flew over Hiroshima. It wasn't a bomber, it was a weather reconnaissance plane named Straight Flush. Its mission? To check cloud conditions over the city. If the sky was clear, the bombing mission would proceed. Japanese radar operators detected the plane and sounded the air raid sirens. People rushed for cover, fearing another bombing raid. But after observing that the plane wasn't attacking, officials lifted the alert and life returned to normal. At 8:15 a.m., the real attack came. Enola Gay, another B-29, appeared in the sky carrying Little Boy, the first atomic bomb used in war. Because the alert had been lifted, many people were out in the open, walking to work, attending school, or standing in food lines. In an instant, Hiroshima was gone. Had the Straight Flush never flown over? Had the sirens stayed on? Would more lives have been saved? A single mistake, made at the worst possible moment, sealed Hiroshima's fate. Speaking of World War II, will you fight for 30 years alone to show your loyalty? December 1974. A young Japanese adventurer wanders through the dense jungles of Lubang Island, Philippines. He's searching for something, or rather, someone. Hidden among the trees, a lone figure watches him, rifle in hand. He is waiting, always waiting. His uniform is old, patched, but neatly kept. His face hardened by decades of survival. The war ended 29 years ago. But no one told him. And even if they did, he wouldn't believe them. But let's rewind back to understand how all of this started. The world is at war. The tides have turned against Japan, and the once mighty empire is on the brink of collapse. Deep inside a military intelligence camp, Hirō Onoda, a young officer trained in guerrilla warfare and psychological resilience, receives a direct order from his commander. You are to hold Lubang Island at all costs, destroy enemy infrastructure, do not surrender, and above all, never, ever believe enemy propaganda. For Onoda, this mission is more than a duty, it is an oath of loyalty to the emperor. A few months later, the Americans invade the island. The Japanese forces are quickly overwhelmed. Some are killed, others captured. But Onoda, along with 3 fellow soldiers, vanishes into the jungle, determined to fight on. What they don't realize is that the war is already ending. By 1945, World War II is over. Japan has surrendered. Cities have been reduced to rubble, and the world is rebuilding. But deep in the Philippine jungle, Onoda and his men are still at war. At first they wait for reinforcements, then they rely on stolen food, sneaking into villages at night, believing the locals are enemy informants. They sabotage farms, attack patrols, and leave behind notes demanding surrender. Then one day a leaflet falls from the sky. The war ended on August 15, 1945. Come down from the mountains. The men gather around. Silence. They stare at the paper. Then, they burn it. This is a trick, Onoda insists. Enemy propaganda. And so, they remain hidden. Years pass. In 1949, one soldier, Yuichi Akatsu, can't take it anymore. One night, he disappears. Weeks later, news spreads. He turned himself in. To Onoda, this is proof. The enemy has captured and brainwashed him. Time moves forward, but for Onoda it stands still. The 1950s become the 1960s. Nations rise and fall. The world enters the space age, but Onoda is still hiding. His small group, now just 3 men, keeps moving, surviving off wild bananas, stolen rice, and cattle they kill in the dead of night. Then, in 1954, during a skirmish with local forces, Shoichi Shimada is shot and killed. Now, only 2 remain. In 1972, his last companion, Kinshichi Kozuka, is also killed. Onoda is alone. For 2 more years he survives, convinced that the world outside is a deception. Every newspaper, every voice calling his name, all lies, all enemy tricks. Until one day, everything changes. In 1974, a young Japanese traveler, Norio Suzuki, arrives on Lubang Island. He's heard the rumors of a ghost soldier still in hiding. He makes his way deep into the jungle. Then, he finds him. Face to face, Onoda holds his rifle, suspicious. Suzuki speaks calmly. "Lieutenant, the war is over. It ended 29 years ago." But Onoda shakes his head. "I will not surrender unless I receive direct orders from my commanding officer." Suzuki returns to Japan. The government finds Onoda's former commander, Yoshimi Taniguchi, now an old man running a bookstore. On March 9, 1974, Taniguchi travels to Lubang. Standing before his former soldier, he issues the final order. "The war is over. You are relieved of duty." Slowly, Onoda lowers his rifle. He removes his worn-out uniform. It is still perfectly kept. Then, for the first time in 3 decades, he breathes. Onoda returns to Japan, greeted as a national hero, but to him, everything feels alien. The world he fought for no longer exists. Feeling out of place, he moves to Brazil to live in isolation. Years later, he returns to Japan and opens a survival training school for young people, teaching them how to endure hardship, just as he did. On January 16, 2014, Hirō Onoda passes away at 91 years old. A soldier who fought not for victory, but for loyalty. A man who never surrendered, until the world finally caught up with him. But Onoda's story is just one of many incredible historical moments that seem almost too unbelievable to be true. As an example, did you know that guillotined people stay conscious after being beheaded? We talk about this in the Facts Collection number 7. Feel free to take a look. And to never miss any of my work, hit the subscribe button. And trust me, some of them might just change the way you see history forever. And before you go, let me know in the comments. Which fact in today's video surprised you the most? I read every comment, and who knows, your suggestion might be in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.